Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Tipas chalav shenafla ala chaticha. The Rashi learns the scenario is that you have a pot with multiple chatichas and with roitiv, where there's one piece that's not totally submerged in the liquid. So part of it is above the liquid, and that's where the tipas chalav fell. It will not automatically transmit through the liquid to all the other chatichas in the pot. It will remain contained within that piece. On the other hand, Tosfos learns that would transmit. What it's referring to here is there was a taka piece of meat that was partially submerged, but placed on top of that meat that's completely out of the liquid is the piece that we're talking about that the tipas chalav fell onto. So tipas chalav shenafla ala chaticha, im yesh ba b'noisen tam ba'oisei chaticha. If the tipa of chalav was big enough that it's not going to be bottled in 60 in the chaticha, and therefore you would detect the taste of the milk in this chaticha, osir, that piece of meat becomes osir. What it does to the rest of the pot is something that the Gemara is going to discuss. We had a discussion about this, but we're going to have another discussion about it. We had it on Daf Kuf. Near a sektera. What if immediately, as Rashi says, higas b'miyad, as soon as you put the milk in, you quickly mixed. So it never concentrated into that just one piece. Rather, it automatically equalized throughout the entire kedera. Now you have the benefit of the volume of the entire kedera to be mevatel that tipas chalav, and therefore myesh b'benoishin tam b'oisei kedera aser, but otherwise not. Beautiful. Zok the Gemara.
You actually made it work. The way the Mishnah says.
It makes it better because now you could use the entire contents of the pot to be mevatel the one tipa, not just that piece of meat.
But if it's always a nice and time,
If it is enough milk to answer the whole pot, you don't have a choice. That's right. You don't have a choice. So the question here is, what is the halacha if I cook a piece of nevela in another couple of pieces of meat, and now they all absorb the time of the nevela. Then I took the piece of nevela out of the pot. Okay? And now I put other meat in the pot. Do I need 60 to mevatel all the meat that was originally infected? Or maybe maybe since there's no original nevela there anymore, I don't have any problem with Isser anymore.
Can somebody mute? There's a lot of background noise.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, this should be better. So Zok to Gemara, Amar Abaye, Taimoi v'loy mamoshoy. If you only have the tam of nevela, so again, I cooked a piece of nevela in a pot, and now I took the piece of nevela out. So there's no nevela here. There's merely the taste of nevela. Would that be osir? Everybody else is osir, but Zok to Abaye, Taimoi v'loy mamoshoy be'almudai rice. It's not tam osir midirabbanon. There's a makor in the Torah that it's osir, and that obviously is going to be basar b'chalav. Tisol kedai tech the rabbanon. If you're going to hold tam ki'ikr is only midirabbanon, mi basar b'chalav, my time aloi gamrinon. Why wouldn't you learn it out of basar b'chalav? By basar b'chalav, you could put a drop of milk into the meat, or you can cook milk. You can cook meat in milk. Then you can take the meat out of the milk, and it's still osir. So obviously the tam that was put into the meat, or the tam of the meat that went into the milk, is enough to aser. So basar b'chalav could be a source l'chola tarakula. The tam is kicker. You might say the chidushu. Maybe basar b'chalav is a very big chiddush. It's a very big chiddush, and therefore, just because we learn this chomer of tam kicker applying to basar b'chalav, who said it would apply anywhere else in the Torah? What's so special about basar b'chalav? So Rashi offers two suggestions. One is basar is completely mutter, chalav is completely mutter. Mixing them together creates a whole isser. That's a very big chiddush. Nevela is also minei ubei, so that's a chiddush. Vibat, that's very unique. Chumras that apply to basar b'chalav would not necessarily apply anywhere else. That's one suggestion. Rashi has another suggestion why basar b'chalav would be a chiddush. And Rashi says, is because derech bishel nashru b'lo achila. Even if you don't eat basar b'chalav, you're over allowed if you just cook it. That's also a chiddush. So therefore, basar b'chalav is unique. Tosfos says that the fact that Rashi said that since there's two devarim shel heter, and they're only usher when they get mixed, that's not a chiddush. You find it elsewhere by kalayim. So that can't be the reason why you wouldn't export this halacha of tam ke'ikr from basar b'cholov. Rather, there's another chiddush. The chiddush is, if you soak milk and meat for a week, they're for sure going to be fully absorbed with each other's taste. There's no issue there. It's only an issue bishel. So you see, it's a specific type of isser that you cannot say would apply anywhere else.
So we said it was bishel, achila, and anah. The 3 times that it says.
Right, but in the bishel shabbat, it's dafka bishel, even though they absorb each other's taste through soaking, you wouldn't answer. It's only also because of bishel.
No. It wouldn't
The isra achila is only also if you cooked it.
Cooked
Yeah, I mean, Rabban, we're talking about the rice. Rabban, all these are anyway. So zok to Gemara. So since basar b'cholov is a chiddush, maybe you would say that you don't apply the normal rules to it, and therefore anything that you see by basar b'cholov, you wouldn't necessarily be able to export elsewhere. But zok Abaya proved to you it's not a chiddush, because he chiddushu then alfagav the lekam.
You say it's a chiddush. It says in the Torah, basar b'cholov.
No, it's a chiddush in the Torah. It's, the Torah is telling us a halacha that's an anomaly, and you wouldn't be able to say principles that we learned by basar b'cholov should apply by other isurim, because basar b'cholov dances to its own tune. It has very unique properties, very unique rules. But zok Abaya, there's one anchoring rule that makes it mainstream, and you know what that is? That it has to be nice and tam. Our mission says, dafka if the milk is nice and tam. If you're going to tell me it's such an anomaly, then a drop of milk going into meat, whether it's nice and tam or not, should answer. It's basar b'cholov. The fact that everybody agrees that even for basar b'cholov, there has to be a time of basar in the cholov in the basar, that means it's mainstream. That means it's mainstream, and even though it has a whole bunch of anomalies, this places it squarely into the rules of other beliefs, and therefore you could bring a raya. So that's a biased conclusion. Tam kikar midaraisa. We can learn it from basar b'cholov. Amalei Rav, not so fast. It's a chiddush. You're telling me it has some mainstream features because you need nice and tam? That's not a mainstream feature. Because the reason why it needs to be nice and tam has nothing to do with the fact that it's mainstream and Yisurim has to be nice and tam. It's because of another specific anomaly that the Torah dictates as a requirement to be osher al basar b'cholov. Derech bishel osher Torah. The Torah says, "Loisavashel gediba chalayvimai." So the Torah is dictating the only type of thing that will be osher is something that was derech bishel. So it's not because it falls into the rules of everything else. It's another anomaly to add to the list. So you wouldn't be able to learn from basar b'cholov. What does it mean, derech bishel osher Torah? I saw 2 pshatim. One pshat is, derech bishel, the Torah says, loisavashel, when you cook something, would you ever add an ingredient to a pot that has 0 impact? Of course not. So obviously the Torah says bishel, it means there'll be an impact. The other pshat that I saw was derech bishel osher Torah. It says loisavashel gediba chalivimai. Now, are we talking of cooking gedi in chalav? Does that mean you cooked it in 1 drop? If you're cooking it in, you're obviously cooking it in an amount that you can cook it. So obviously, it's going to be tam. So for those,
The first part doesn't. Because
we're cooking, everything cooks at hot water.
You add, if you add eggs, using it as a binding agent.
Okay, it's for a purpose.
There's no tom.
Right, but there's something here. So cooking, you have to be putting it in for a reason. If there's absolutely no reason that you're putting it in, that wouldn't be identified with the word bishel. Word bishel means you're putting something in that's impactful. Yeah. Okay, so that's the machlokes. Now Tosfos says, don't be fooled by Rava. Rava surely agrees that tam kikar is deraisa. He's just saying this is not a raya, but there's rayas from other places. Rav, zok Rav. Now Rav is going to continue on the Mishnah. We're at the point where this one chaticha bechem aser. Now zok Rav, kivin shenos and tam bechaticha. No, once this first chaticha is aser, chaticha atzm nasis nevela. Now this chaticha, you look at it like it's its own iser, and therefore voiseres kol chaticha is kulan mepnei shen mina. So let's talk about nevela. You cooked a piece of nevela in a pot with another piece. You remove the original nevela, but you have this secondary piece that now has the taste of nevela in it. If you cook it with other pieces, it will aser all the other pieces, because it itself is aser, and min b'mina is not bottle. That is Rav's chiddush. Now, of course, I was discussing this morning with Yaakov Friedman, how does it just spread? It must be that if you cooked it with other pieces and you mixed it, at that point it will spread. Otherwise, if it's still an isolated piece, it's not going to spread. Which is something that Yaakov wasn't so sure about. So Rav, and now if you cook it with other things in a way where the tam can spread, like it's in gravy or so, or the pot is sealed and the steam in the pot spreads everything around. Mazuta told Ravina, Michti, Rav command nomal shmaitzi. Rav is saying that it's answering all the chatichas in the pot because it's min b'minoi. That's not a libudu chulamo. That's Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar min b'minoi loy batel. He's obviously working with Rabbi Yehuda. Now we learned a couple of blot ago a chiddush of Rava in Rabbi Yehuda that makes a big kula in Rabbi Yehuda shita. And if Rav would subscribe to that chiddush of Rava, then weiter it wouldn't answer the rest of the pieces of meat in the pot. Why? Zokti Gemara lema pliga ad Rava. Rav probably is not consistent with Rava. The Omar Rava, Kasav Rabbi Yehuda holds. What happens in our pot over here? You have many pieces of kosher meat, and you have this piece that was a chaticha nasas nevela, right? So the halacha is, it's not just those pieces of meat. You know what else is in that pot? Water and gravy and vegetables. So we have two factors here. There's an element of min b'minoi here, and there's an element of min b'sheina minoi. How do you process such a scenario? So Zokt Rava, Rabbi Yehuda holds, Kol shu min uminoi vida v'racher. If there's two things happening over here simultaneously, there's a min uminoi mixture, and there's a min b'sheina minoi mixture, you completely remove the min b'minoi from the equation. It doesn't hurt, and it doesn't benefit. It cannot be mitzvah with the heter to be mevatel the iser, but it will not be mitzvah with the iser to be mevatel the heter. So saleka semina kimisha eno, you completely ignore and delete the min b'minoi from the equation. Now you look at it as if this usher piece of meat is just sitting in gravy with no other meat around it. If there's enough gravy and vegetables and other contents in the pot that would be mevatel this first of meat that got infected, it will be mutter, and then the whole pot's mutter, even the pieces of meat. That was a chiddush that Rav said in Rabbi Yehuda. So even though min b'minoi is not bottle, that's if you have an exclusive mixture of min b'minoi. But if you have a mixed mixture, then the min b'sheina minoi will do its thing. Now, if Rav holds like that, well then over here, if you cook this piece of meat with other pieces of meat, it shouldn't answer the other pieces of meat. Because maybe there's the gravy and the other components of min b'sheina minoi in the pot that would be ma'avatul isiser. So therefore Rav must be inconsistent with Rav. Omerlei, so Marzutra said, Ravina said back to Marzutra, no, this is very consistent with Rava. And he said as follows, if the roitiv is very loose roitiv, so it's water, it's definitely not the min of meat, it's water, it's vegetables, it's other things, hachanami, you would be right. But Rav said his halacha, it was very thick roitiv, which Rashi explains, meaning it had a whole bunch of pulp in it. So basically the whole roitiv is also meat. So it's not a mixture. It's only min b'minoi, and that's what Rav meant when he said that it would be awesome. Talk to Gemara, Umay Kasover. This takes us to a completely different question. Because if you look at what we have over here, we have a piece of meat that had blia of nevela in it. Why did the blia of nevela get concentrated into this piece of meat? Because the meat was standing by itself. Or you have a piece of meat that milk was nivled into it. Why was there enough concentration to usher the meat? Because it was that piece of meat fending for itself. Right? Now, if I now take this piece of meat and now I cook it in a big pot with other pieces of meat, the tam is going to spread. So why didn't you say now the tam in this piece of meat will be diluted? Because whatever is in it will now equalize throughout the entire pot. And now even the original piece of meat will be able to be mevatel, the little bit that remains inside it, the little concentration that remains inside it, should be batel b'shishim. So zog to Gemara, umay kasaver. Ikasaver avshel asoichte mutter. If you hold that after something comes osir, and you cook it and it becomes further diluted, that will release its isser. Well, then I'm back to the same question. that should totally undermine the entire concept of Chaticha Nas Nevela. Chaticha Nas Nevela means it
Hi,
remains on
my name is Matt.
its own. But it wouldn't be Aser on its own if the Isser was extracted from it. Ella, it must be, Rav does not subscribe to Efshel L'Soichle Aser. Now, what we're struggling to understand is the relationship between these two halachas, Efshel L'Soichle Aser and Mutter and Chaticha Nas Nevela. Because if you think about it, at first glance, they seem to be identical concepts. Chaticha Nas Nevela, and therefore, even if you take the Belias out of it, it remains Aser. But they're not completely one and the same, because you could say Efshel L'Soichle Aser, the original Belias you can't pull out, but then maybe you only have to reckon with the volume of the original Belias when you're talking about Aser and the rest of the pot, not with the volume of the meat. So the Chaticha Nas Nevela is actually making the meat itself into Isser. So that could be the added concept of Chaticha Nas Nevela. You still need Efshel L'Soichle Aser. Once you have Efshel L'Soichle Aser, then you could build on that with an additional Isser of Chaticha Nas Nevela. The reason why I'm not so sure about that is because I want to just read the Loshen Rashi. Rashi says over here, Amai Chaticha Nas Nevela. If you hold that Efshel L'Soichle is mutter, how could you say Chaticha Nas Nevela? Ha'efshel hi lisachet mimena. When you cook it with a bigger group, it's now going to be extracted and diluted. V'lechalek lacherim shelo kiblu mimenu klum. Vein lanu lesar achit nachalav tam b'chula. Now you can count the entire pot as the medium in which we need to be mevatel the iser of milk. The lekalameimar efshet lisoichet mizeh v'libalo b'zeh. You're not going to say if it gets pulled out of one piece of meat, it's going to concentrate in another piece of meat. You say it's going to equalize throughout the whole pot. Shreikulun shavim b'daimoi. Ve'ezet tate ve'ezet eser. Ela kasavar, it must be that Rav holds, mishenesher cheticha shuv ein leheter b'schita. Even though if you cook it, maybe chemically pull stuff out, but the issue will not go away. Ve'asheminon af haheter shaba nasis iser liyos kan shir godoy lesser acherem harbe. So my question is, in this line of Rashi, v'asheminon af, is that part and parcel of the Efshel L'Soichle Aser, or is that the added concept that Chaticha Nas Nevela adds? I'm not clear from Rashi what Rashi means when he says, and we also know that the heter is Nas Iser. Is that we also know because of the added concept of Chaticha Nas Nevela, or is it part of the old thing? And if it's part of the old thing, then I don't see any distinction between Efshel L'Soichle Aser and Chaticha Nas Nevela. Then they're identical. Okay, so Zok to Gemara. There's a lot of talk in the Rishonim about how these two concepts work together, but I just wanted to get clarity in what Rashi says. Zok to Gemara weiter. Ela kasaver Efshel L'Soichle Aser. Rav must hold that Efshel L'Soichle Aser, and therefore cooking it in a bigger pot now will not remove the Isser, even though it gets diluted, will not remove the Isser from the original piece. The Itmar, there's actually such a machlokes. Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Darmi Efshel L'Soichle is Aser. And Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon Bar Rebbe, V'Rish Lakish, Amri Efshel L'Soichle is mutter. Frag the Gemara, V'Savar Rav, Efshel L'Soichle is Aser. Rav really holds Efshel L'Soichle is Aser. I'm going to demonstrate that he can't possibly hold like that. Because by Itmar, we had a brisa. Kazai is Basar, Shenaf L'Soich Yoresh Shel Chalav. Kazai is a Basar fed into a big pot of Chalav. Amarav, Basar Aser, because the Basar was surely absorbed and was cooked with milk. But the milk in the pot, Rabbi Dai, you'll say the meat is batal b'shisha. The chalav mutter, but the chalav in the pot would be mutter. The problem is, if you hold that the milk that's absorbed into the meat is chaticha nas nevela, the milk itself now becomes aser mineu bei because of basar b'chalav. V'sol kedaitach efshel l'soichle aser. So now the milk itself is chaticha nas nevela, and therefore chalav amai mutter. Why would the rest of the chalav in the pot be mutter? Because it's mevatel the time of the meat, but it's min b'minai with the milk that's chaticha nas nevela already. So yes, it might be mevatel the meat, but it can't be mevatel the milk. So chalav amai mutter, chalav nevelahu, as Rashi says, chalav amai mutter harei chelev ma'at Shenivla b'basar nasa nevela. No matter how little it is, now it's an isser of a nevela munei ubei. Sharei nesar. Now that it's usher, now it's kanasher the rest of the pot. B'min b'minoi. Ulchashechazer v'niflot b'shara cholov havale min b'minoi cholov usher b'cholov heter. For Rav Islay, like Rabbi Yehuda, min b'minoi bottle. So how could Rav justify that the cholov is going to be mutter? Yeah, but the davar acher is not enough to be mevatel the milk. Right? That was all boy. It was too small. Only kazais a bosser. In Chalame, if it was davar acher that was big enough, it would work. So if Zok to Gemara, a massive chiddush that's so off the charts that it's not going to survive scrutiny. La'olam kasav Rav efshel l'soich le'oser. For shiny hasam, there's no such iser bosser b'cholov. There is a bosser is oser if there's cholov in it, but there's no iser on the cholov that has bosser in it. For shiny hasam davar kol lo'isavashel gediba chalayvimai. The Torah never discusses the cholov. The Torah is discussing the meat. Meat that absorbed tam cholov is oser, but the milk is mutter. There's no iser bosser b'cholov on the milk. And therefore, the milk is mutter, because even the milk that was absorbed into the meat didn't become nevela. The milk never oser. It's only the meat that's oser. Zok to Gemara, that's not acceptable. V'sava Rav gedi oser Torah v'loy cholov. I have a black and white proof that you're wrong. V'itmar chatzi zayis bosser v'chatzi zayis cholov shabishlan zemzeh. If you cooked a half a gazais of cholov and a half a gazais of bosser together, now you need the content of the milk too in order to make iser. Amarav loy kalachilasa, you get malchus for eating it. Why? You didn't have a full gazais of bosser, and the milk is not a problem. Elamai, it must be that the milk is aser as well. Ve'ina loy kal bishulay, the Gemara is going to get back to why. Yisal kadaitech gedi aser torah v'loy chalav. Achila my loika chatzi shirhu. You're only eating a half a kazayis of basar that has milk taste in it. Ella, we're forced to say Ella la'olam kasav rav cholav nami aser. So we're back to the drawing board. Why is the rest of the cholav mutter in that pot? You should say that a little bit of cholav became nevela, and now it asers the rest of the cholav in the pot because min b'minoi loy batel. V'hachem b'mayaskinon kigoyin shenafal etoich yoyra reisachas. The bivla bala bifet lepolit. Milk fell into a cooking, bubbling pot. When a pot is cooking and bubbling, yes, the meat will be boilea, but during that bubbling time, the milk will not be pilot. The meat will not reject any of the milk inside it. So therefore, the milk that was inside this piece of meat never came into contact with the milk that's usher, never came into contact with the rest of the milk. You know why? Because it would not be pilot. It would be sealed and contained within the piece of meat. When it cools off, it's going to split. It's going to aser. So you're right, but it fell in for a second and you pulled it right out. That milk never had a chance to leave. Now, Tosfos asks a very simple and obvious kasha. If you take a boiling pot of water and you drop in spinach and it's cooking and bubbling, will the water turn green? Of course it will turn green. So what's the Gemara talking about? Even though it's cooking, it's spoiled. So Tosfos the Mitzias tells me that what the Gemara says doesn't make sense. No, the Gemara is saying there's a rule. When something's boiling hot, it only absorbs. It won't give off. You see, will. Okay, so Tosfos says with meat as well. Tosfos asks question with meat as well. So let's look at Tosfos. Teimo Tosfos. The davar near leinaimu. You could see with your own eyes. The polit, the chenoist in yerek b'kdei reisachas, mishtanim maris hamayim in the yerek v'chein basar shumen. So to head off your concern, nimuach l'soicha v'nir shamnun is all right. Right? It's not like we're liberals that you could tell us facts that don't match what we see. It's finished as I. So Tosfos has two different options. I don't want to get into Tosfos, but Tosfos says could be that yes, it will be pilot, but only after it becomes fully saturated. So the vegetable won't instantly make the water green. After it becomes fully saturated with water, after a couple of seconds, then it starts giving off its taste, its look. And here you're speaking in Agamor where you pulled it out before it was saturated. Tosfos doesn't like that. Here's another shot that yes, it will be pilot right away, but what it's boileya, it won't be pilot. It might be pilot some other thing that it has in it. So the meat might right away put a taste into the milk, but the milk that it absorbed, that it's not going to put in right away. So that already, you need a very detailed chemical lab. You need a lab to verify that. But that's what Tosfos says. Zok to Gemara weiter. Gufa. Now let's get down to the issue of the half of zayis of basar and the half of zayis of cholov. Gufa. Chatzi zayis basar v'chatzi zayis cholov shebishlen zeh zeh. Amrav loik al chilosev and loik al bishulay. Frek Gemara manavshach. Imit starfen. If the milk and the meat are both mitzaref to a shear, so then you cook the shear of Isser, a bishel nami loki. And you loy mitzarfen, so then an achilo nami loy loki. So what is the case? Zok Gemara loylam loy mitzarfi. Avad and not mitzaref. You need to have a full kazayis of each. So why is it usher if you eat it? Because we're not talking about eating just a half a kazayis of each. We're talking about you cooked a huge pot full of milk and meat, and it became also machmas basar b'cholov. And now you took out of it a small piece of meat with a little piece of cheese together, and you ate it. But of course, it became basar b'cholov already. Once it became basar b'cholov, we've already come to the conclusion that the cholov itself also becomes also basar b'cholov. But when we're talking about cooking them together, it was never necessary. You took a raw piece of cheese, you took a raw piece of meat, and you cooked them together. There's not enough shear to aser. Zok Gemara, la'olam le'mistari u'beba miyoyir gedoyla. Pretty simple. V'levi amar.
Why is no malchus on the bishel?
If you cooked only a half a zayis of each, because you didn't have a full zayis.
That's it.
The case of the achila was you took it from a big pot. The case of the bishel is you cooked it like a half and half. So therefore there was never a shear. But the half and half that we're talking about you're eating is not the same half and half that you cooked. It's a full pot that you just took a little bit of meat and a little bit of meat cheese out of. So what you're saying is the ratio in the sefer is not really the same case. Levi Amar, Ein Loika al Bishulai. Levi told you not get malchus for the bishul. V'chein Tani Levi b'masnisin keshem. I'm sorry, Af Loika al Bishulai. I didn't read it right. Af, you will get malchus even for cooking a half a zayis of milk with a half a zayis of meat. V'chein Tani Levi b'masnisin keshem shel Loika al Chilasoi kach Loika al Bishulai. Now, what is bishel? How do you define bishel for the purposes of basar b'cholov? It's just dumping a piece of meat into cooking milk? No. It's a bishel that even a goy would consider it fully cooked. So it has to be fully cooked. It can't be splashed into hot water for a second. It would have to be fully cooked. Otherwise, it would not be asur al basar b'cholov, which now creates a little bit of a problem. Because a moment ago we said it's mivla bala mivla polit because you just put it in for a second, right? Question is, if it's not fully cooked, so it's not really basar b'cholov b'deraisa. So I'm not sure how that will fit together. Zok to Gemara weiter. The efshel l'soichle atzmai tanahi. Now let's get back to the efshel l'soichle concept. Whether or not, if you have a piece of meat that was nivla with nevela, and now you cooked it in a much bigger pot, will you say that now the issur will become diluted, equalized in the pot, and the original piece that was usher because it was belay nevela will now become mutter? That's a machlokes tonight. The Tanya, tibas cholov shenafla ala chaticha. Similar to our Mishnah, a drop of milk fell on a chaticha that was isolated. Kivin shenos natam bechaticha hachaticha atzma nasis nevela. V'oiseres kol hachatichas kulon b'pnei shein mina divi Rabbi Yehuda, as Rav explained earlier. V'chachamim oimrim, no. Once you cook it with other things, even though it was originally neser by itself, it won't aser achetitin tam beroitiv uvekiba uvechatichas. You count the entire pot as the medium in which you could dilute the iser, and it will become mutter. Clearly, he holds efshel l'soichle is mutter. Amar Rebbe. So Rebbe comes up the middle to be machriya. I hold a little bit like Rabbi Yehuda, and I hold a little bit like the Rabbanim. I don't completely agree with Rabbi Yehuda. I only agree with part of what he said. So what did Rebbe say? Nir and divi Rabbi Yehuda. What part of what Rabbi Yehuda said do I agree with? That it's asur b'shalei nir v'shalei kisa. If you never mixed it or you never covered it, that's when I agree the whole thing becomes asur. Now you can ask why. How did it spread? So we're going to get there in a minute. So, my loy near v'loy kisa. What does it mean? You agree with Rabbi Yehuda that the whole pot is going to be aser if you never mixed it or if you never covered it. Ilema loy near klal v'loy kisa klal. So then, how in the world did this original piece of meat aser the rest of the meat in the pot? Mivla bala, yes, it was below milk, and now this piece of meat has milk in it. But how in the world did it transmit it to the rest of the pot? Mivlat leipalat. You never cooked it together with anything. Elo must be that where does Rav agree with Rabbi Yehuda? Where it was lanier betchila el b'soif, v'lakiza betchila el b'soif. So what happened was first the milk fell on this piece of meat and ashered this piece of meat because it had a high concentration. Once this piece of meat became nesar, then you went and mixed the whole pot up. Now it's going to spread throughout the entire pot. That's where Rav says, I agree with you, Rabbi Yehuda, that the whole pot will be aser, because efshel l'soichle is aser, and chaticha nasa nevela. Why don't you say that it got neutralized? The teretz is kasaver efshel l'soichle aser. Now, if Rav says, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda in that case, it must be that Rabbi Yehuda asers in an additional case, which Rav doesn't agree with, right? I hold like you in A, but not in B. So what's the B? So it must be that Rabbi Yehuda is even more machmer. Michlal, Rabbi Yehuda must hold that even kinir mitchilavat soif, v'kiza mitchilavat soif aser. He must hold that even if you mixed it right from the moment the drop of milk went in, it would be aser. But why? It for sure should be bottle b'shishim there. The teretz is because it's a gzera. It's a chomer gzera. Amai haloi bala klal. It was completely diluted. And you know why he asers? He's worried. Near yafa yafa, v'lekiza yafa yafa. Maybe he didn't mix it good, and there was a higher concentration in one piece of meat over another piece of meat that would become aser. So therefore, he said, you drop a piece of milk into meat. I don't care what happens, how much you stir it. We're concerned. We're asering the whole pot. So that part of Rabbi Yehuda's chomer, Rav does not endorse, but the part of his chomer that says chaticha nas nevela and efshel l'soichle aser, that part he does endorse. This is where I stopped in the morning because I ran out of time, but we're mamish in the middle of Rav's halacha. It would be a shame to go back, so I just want to finish off the second half. Amar Mar, v'divrei chachamim keshenir v'chisa. Where does Rav agree with the chachamim? That's in the case of nir v'chisa. So, Frek Gemara, what is precisely the case? My nir umay chisa. Ilayma nir b'soif, v'lenir b'tchila, v'chisa b'soif, v'lachisa b'tchila. Well, that's the same case where Rav a moment ago agreed with Rabbi Yehuda. Ha'amrit nir and diver Rabbi Yehuda baha. So where does Rav hold like the Rabbana? You have to say it's near mitchila vatsoif, v'chisa mitchila vatsoif. Where Rabbi Yehuda was machmer because he's afraid you won't mix it good. There's a Rav. I hold like the Rabbanon. I'm not concerned. There, it will be bottled with shishim because the whole pot had enough volume to be bottled to drop of milk. But that means mechal the Rabbanon savri. The Rabbanon have to hold even more kuladik than that because I'm only agreeing with part of what the Rabbanon said. So they must extend their heter. The Rabbanon savri near b'soif or near b'tchila, kiza b'soif or kiza b'tchila would be mutter. Alma kasavri, you see, klar that they hold. Efshel l'soichle mutter. So now we've illustrated the machlokes tanoim. Rabbi Yehuda and Rav agrees with the concept that efshel l'soichle is aser. The Rabbanon hold efshel l'soichle is mutter. Okay, let's stop here and we'll be mamshich tomorrow. So it wasn't hard, but it was illustrative. Did you say this thing?